Hi, my name is Mary Jabalisco and welcome to our latest video. What we will be doing in this video is painting the featured painting together step by step. Be sure that you have read through the material and you've assembled your supplies. If you need any supplies, you can of course go to kingsland.com and we'll be happy to send them to you. So get out your materials and let's get started. Well, we're starting off on a little landscape, just a couple of Tuscany type buildings. The first thing I'm going to do, and this is on anything that involves perspective, I'm going to check that my verticals are vertical, because in perspective we do have vanishing points, which we'll talk about as we get going, but there's some truisms with perspective, and one is that the vertical lines are always vertical, parallel to the side of the surface. So I'm just checking those real quick. And then we do have some vanishing points, but we will worry about that when we get to it. But my verticals are vertical, so I check those with my see-through ruler, and so I think that I'm ready to paint. On our other pieces, what we've done is we've done the background last, but on this we'll do the background first. And the first thing that we will do is the sky. And I have prepped my board just with a real neutral color. And you can start off with any light neutral color. But I'm going to put in this sky. And it's going to be light and grayish. And it's just actually phthalo blue, a touch of white, and a touch of gray, actually more than a touch of white. And what we will do, and there's a couple kinds of perspective, and one is aerial perspective and then one is linear. And so we're going to start off working with this aerial perspective. And as things are farther in the distance, they're grayer, and they're also they should appear a little bit transparent. And we'll work a little bit of that with the mountain. But putting in the sky, and I'm doing a little bit of a brush mix with the goal of maybe picking up a variety of colors. So if you see streaks of colors in there, that's what that is. And we can put clouds in later if we decide to get that detailed. But what happens with aerial perspective is this is going to be lighter and grayer. Then the next one that we put in will be a little bit darker because it's closer to us. And it could be a little bit brighter if we want it to be, just depending on what the object is. This is, of course, wondering why I don't have a larger brush, but it does give me a chance to talk about the different kinds of perspective. Now, if we had trees, etc. in this, and the trees were way in the distance, those too would have kind of a transparent feel to them. It's just the way our eyes work, that as things get farther away, they just get just a little bit more transparent. And we know in reality they're not, and they're not grayer. It's just the way our eyes work, and so when we're painting realistically, we have to kind of use some of those tricks that we know that will make us think we're, seeing things that are three-dimensional on a flat 2D surface. Okay, now I'm going to put in the next, just kind of a blue-gray mountain. And notice this is just a little bit darker, and it's not going to be as crisp as the bluish mountain, or pardon me, the greenish mountain that we're going to put in just a moment. Painting around the houses. I'm doing here is blending this back edge ever so slightly into the sky. Now when we get to the houses we won't do that, but we're doing that on this because again it'll make it just be slightly more transparent and fading. Okay, now we can put in our green, and this is going to be just a little bit darker and more apparent, and we won't really blend that too much into the gray. I'm going to lighten this gray up just a little bit. Can't get much darker than our green. So now putting in this green hill, which is probably in reality the same color as the bluish hill, but it's just that much closer, and so we can see a little bit more of the color because we're not looking through the atmosphere, and that's where we get the name the atmospheric perspective. We're not looking through layers of clouds and whatever else is in the atmosphere. I'd like to get a little bit darker going down. And on this particular hill, I'm using a slip slap technique because I just want it to have a few highs and lows. Just because it's just a smidge closer to us, we'll be able to see some very, very vague detail. So already I feel like I can start to see that, the difference. The sky pretty far away, that bluish, fading a little bit into the sky. And this one just a little bit closer to us. I'm going to make this go up a little bit, just so it's not exactly parallel to that other land formation. Well, let's talk about our foreground here. I'm going to start off just with some gray values. And I'm brush mixing browns and blues into this. Now as these colors get closer to us, they're going to get warmer. And so that's why you can use the gray that has that little bit of brown in it. Even coming back and trying to give the look of a rocky formation in this foreground. Again, in this foreground, we're not going to have a great deal of detail, but you can have obviously more than in the background. And I think what's warranted is in this foreground, because our buildings are fairly bright, is we can put in a few little unexpected pops of color. And if we need to tone it down, we will. I haven't done a great deal with landscapes in my painting, but I do enjoy landscapes, and what I usually do is have landscapes that are behind other things. So this is quite a treat to paint a landscape that's just meant to be a standalone, just kind of a glimpse into a Tuscany hill village. if you ever have a chance, if you're ever in Italy, be sure to take the train. What a wonderful way to see the interesting landscape. It's just very diverse and changes as you go across. I'm trying to get some of these rocks to hold, but you don't get saturated with paint. So now I can finish up with a few little greens. Now if you're adept with a palette knife, you could of course done this with a palette knife also. This foreground, that is, the rest of it not as much. I'm just coming back in and seeing if I can get a few little rock formations to hold. Just coming back in. You have all the different mixes and colors in your information, but you're just coming back in on top with the light value and just picking out shapes. So there's the foreground and background of our little landscape. Your choice, you can certainly come in and dry, or just move right on. I'm going to dry this really quick and then start adding the buildings. These buildings are old and they're stucco-y, and so initially we'll paint them in the proper values and then come back in and create some of that old stucco look. But you can, pick up a few of the variety of colors as you go. But this is the side of the light, and so this side of the building is quite light and illuminated. So I'm working all of the nice light warm colors into it. I think what makes this kind of an appealing little landscape is that we're going to have buildings that are red and buildings that are green, and of course the quiet landscape back behind, but that definitely gives it quite a bit of character. Now in terms of perspective, you can really see the perspective here, that these lines are going to vanish, the ones on the pinkish side, are going to vanish to a single vanishing point on the horizon line. And they point toward each other, but we know in reality they're relatively parallel to each other. This is an old house, of course, but to give that illusion of depth and form, you have to put perspective to work. And so this line and this line are converging to a single vanishing point on the horizon line. And that's what happens in perspective. Now, when we put the windows in, they will do exactly the same thing. So the little windows the tops will be parallel to the top of the building, and then the bottoms will be kind of somewhere in between, because we're far enough away from this building that we're actually seeing, both vanishing points. If we were relatively close, like in a still life, you wouldn't see that as much. So the farther away you are, the more perspective you get to see. So coming in and just softening the edge of this building. I'm going to jump right in to this other building, and I just think it's such a wonderful color. It's kind of an aqua look to it. And it definitely is making our landscape quite exciting. And you can be pretty flush at the bottom with the rocks, etc. And then we'll pull some over the top of the building when we get there. I'm going to casually, very casually, paint over the top of those windows. Just a little too much to paint around. Now this particular building, we're not seeing as much in terms of vanishing points because it is parallel to us. And then what's also kind of deceiving is down in here, it ends up looking like it's going downhill, but it's not. It's just because it's kind of almost like the rocks have grown around it over the centuries, not just years, but centuries. I live in a house that was built in 1929, and I thought that was pretty impressive until I went to Europe. Not so impressive. Making this side slightly lighter, just again because of the way the light's coming in. Now this roof, is kind of again another interesting color to add to the mix. Kind of a yellow-green. I think it almost looks like it has started to mold. I'm trying to get variety. Like I said, sometimes it's tricky to get the variety wet into wet, and so we will definitely come back and create variety when it's dry. But if you can drop in other colors, light and darks on top. If you're really good at blending, I'm pretty good at blending. I have to just stop myself and say, stop, stop, stop. You just want it to be a little bit on the irregular side. I'm going to start to scoot some of these cliff rocks up onto the building. The main reason for that is so that just, it looks like these buildings are, part of the landscape, which they are. Easier to do this wet into wet. We still have the roof to add, but I think what's necessary is to dry this a little bit, and I have a little tiny bit of repair work to do. Missed a little bit of the mountain. But go ahead and dry what you have here, and then we can come back in and add that other roof back on, and then we can start with some of our really fun, interesting detail. Coming in with a little small brush, and I'm going to do the other roof real quick. And it's very similar to the first roof that we did. Just kind of a brownish dull green. Trying to keep that roof line straight. And the rest of the painting is dry, so I just feel somewhat obligated to drag color everywhere. I'm going to come in now with black and start to create some of the window shapes and eaves, etc. And I think I'll start right in this area. I think I'm going to have to switch to a smaller pointy brush. And I actually, as you get going, you realize it's futile to try to paint around something that's about the width of a hair. So I'm just going to paint this all in black and then come back on top and put in those little supports. And there's some windows that are here. And fortunately, verticals are always vertical. The top line of the window is going to just exactly line up with the roof line. But first, I think I'll just get the windows in. And now I'm going to thin down just a little bit of paint to help facilitate creating the sharper edges. And of course, can't let good paint go to waste, so I think I'll start adding some of the interesting rougher detail. Then we have a smallish window over here. Exactly following the roof line. And then, of course, a door. And doing just as before, placing it in and then crisping it up with the smaller brush. Just coming in and making some of the rock shapes just a little bit more distinct. And then on our blue building, we have no shapes. And I think I'm going to approach those the way I did those other little tiny shapes on the other building. I'm just going to place this in and then draw in the divisions. This is a fairly loose painting, but you can't be loose with the perspective, so I will go back and check that everything is just as it should be. And back behind, I have a little bit of black on my brush. I'm actually taking the black and not necessarily casting a shadow onto that mountain, but it just seems like it's a little bit more shadowed than the upper section. Could be a tree line. But as we mentioned way back at the beginning, anything that you do in this background has to look a little bit on the transparent side. Again, coming back in with just the whisper black on my brush and creating those rock shapes with the dark. And then what actually has to happen is you have to show some distinct planes across the top. Coming in with my variety of light grays. And of course there's the dappled light. We need to put we have the orange in this area. I'd like to strengthen it, but then what has to happen, of course, is it needs to be repeated. Like I said, I love this little bit of color here. But dry brushing this on the building repeats the color, adds some interest. It makes it look maybe just some exposed underpaint or rust or something similar. On the roof you can come in and show a little bit of almost reflected light from the sky onto the roof. This will start to give it the texture that it needs. Just that dry brushing. Let's dry this one more time and then we can add our final details. I'm going to add the window divisions using the same color as how we painted the house initially. And of course, they need to be vertical. I don't know that they have to just be absolutely perfect, but they do have to look like at one point they were perfectly vertical. Then we need to add the rafters on our other building. It's interesting just how these little details just start to make this look more like a finished painting. Just coming in with the light from the lighter side of the building. And notice that these are just pointing up to a single vanishing point. So just make sure they all look like they're aiming the same direction. And I think on this side of the building we just need it to be a little bit lighter and a little bit warmer, just to give it that exposed stucco look and like it's being struck by the light. So I like that we have that little bit of a darker color. So now I'm coming in just with warm white. Just a dirty brush. The last thing that we need to do, I think it's the last thing, is add just a little bit around the windows. And the door, as I'm starting on the door. This is a very light, warm white again, just thin down slightly. And just showing a door frame. This door frame has to go up just a little bit. It's interesting, once you outline it you can see that. But this has to angle up because of the angle of the building, of course. Now the light window sills are not showing up. I'm going to come back in and shade around them just to make them pop a little bit. I'm not going to shade everywhere, just a little bit to give an indication. Just want to put a little bit more stucco on that side. So there's our little landscape. I think even in this little landscape we learned a great deal. We learned about perspective, aerial, and linear. Maybe how to create a few rocks, how to add texture to buildings. So there's our little Tuscan landscape. See you next time.